A man sits on a damp stone floor in Rome, chained at the wrist to an imperial guard. They treat it like a first-century guide to choosing happiness when your circumstances are bleak. They read it as a call to look on the bright side. He knows that the Philippians and anyone reading this letter 2 millennia later are trapped inside a completely different kind of cell. A psychological prison so common and so deadly that most people do not even realize the door has been locked. If you are breathing right now, you are likely infected with the when-then disease. You know exactly how this virus operates. You lie awake at 3 in the morning, staring at the shadows moving across your ceiling, feeling the tension locked tight in your jaw and your shoulders. You listen to the hum of the refrigerator, and you make a quiet bargain with the dark. When the medical test comes back clear, then I will exhale. When the bank account finally hits a certain number, then I will rest. When the quiet, gnawing conflict in my house resolves, then I will have peace. We hinge our entire emotional stability on the future resolution of a present crisis. We outsource our joy to a set of circumstances we do not have the power to control. We demand that the iron chain snaps before we give ourselves permission to sing. Every advertisement flashing on your screen, every notification vibrating in your pocket, trains you to believe that your current life is a problem waiting to be solved. You feel the low-grade anxiety thrumming in your chest. You carry it into your kitchen while you pour your morning coffee, feeling the heat, to find the silver lining, to just smile through the pain, because God is in control. We stitch verses from this letter onto throw pillows of the ceramic mug against your palms. You take it with you on your commute, gripping the steering wheel while the red taillights stretch out endlessly in front of you. We convince ourselves that joy is a destination on a map, a place we will finally arrive at once the weather breaks. But the weather never actually breaks. It just changes names. If the medical test is clear today, the car will break down tomorrow. If the bank account fills up, the relationship will fracture. If you wait for the variables of your life to align perfectly before you experience chara, you will spend your entire existence in a psychological waiting room. You will sit there smelling the sterile alcohol and flipping through old magazines, completely missing the grace that is standing right next to you. The when-then disease is not a harmless coping mechanism. It is a voluntary surrender of your present life. Paul refuses to play that game. If anyone had the right to say, "When I get out of Rome, then I will rejoice," it was the man chained to a Praetorian guard whose armor smelled of stale sweat and oiled leather. If anyone had the right to defer his joy until the verdict was handed down, it was the man facing a tribunal that could legally sever his head from his neck. But he knew that joy deferred is joy assassinated. Instead, he drops a statement in Philippians chapter 4 that completely dismantles and print them on coffee mugs. But happiness is a biological response to favorable conditions. Happiness requires the iron chain to break, the when-then disease. And to do it, he borrows a very specific word from the arrogant, elite philosophers of the Greek world, and he turns it completely inside out. The Greek philosophers walked the marble steps of the ancient forums. They wore heavy woolen cloaks. They debated in the heat of the public squares. Their highest ethical goal was a concept called autarkia, self-sufficiency, complete independence. A Stoic philosopher believed the world was chaotic. You cannot control the emperor. You cannot control the weather. You cannot control a rotting disease. So you detach. You build a fortress inside your own mind. You feel the winter wind, but you refuse to shiver. You feel the hollow ache of an empty stomach, but you refuse to complain. You strip away all desire. You become an island of apathy in a sea of suffering. That is autarkia. Then Paul hijacks their word. In Philippians chapter 4, verse 11, the prisoner dictates this sentence: "I have learned in whatever situation I am to be content." The Greek word our Bibles translate as content is autarkos. The elite philosophers in the Roman world would have nodded in approval. They would have looked at this chained Jewish rabbi and thought he had finally mastered their highest virtue. They thought he was claiming self-sufficiency, They thought he was claiming emotional detachment, but Paul immediately shatters their definition. 2 sentences later, he writes, "the most abused," out of context verse in the entire New Testament. Happiness needs the diagnosis to be clear and the bank account to be full. Joy is not a mood you manufacture. It is a defiance you declare. Philippians 4:13. I can do all things through him who strengthens me. Modern Christians print this on gym bags. They paint it on football cleats. They use it as a motivational chant to win a championship or pass a math test. But look at the context. Look at the word autarkos. Paul is not talking about winning a wrestling match. He is talking about starving. He is talking about surviving a Roman beating. He is talking about freezing in a damp cell without a winter coat. The Stoic said, "I am sufficient in myself." Paul says, "I am sufficient in another." This is not detachment. This is attachment. Contentment is not the absence of desire. It is the presence of a sustaining person. He is not numb to the iron chain. The iron still chafes his skin. The cell still reeks of stale urine and damp stone. His stomach still cramps from the meager prison rations. He feels every single jagged edge of his reality, but none of it possesses the authority to dictate his internal peace. Because his autarkos is not drawn from his own psychological willpower. It is drawn from an endless well standing entirely outside of himself. He has cracked the code. He has found the absolute immunity to the when-then disease. But he does not just keep the secret in Rome. And understanding the exact difference between those two realities changes entirely how you read these 4 chapters. He wraps it up in this parchment, hands it to a messenger, and forces the believers in Philippi to make a devastating choice. The ink dries on the parchment. The scribe sets down his reed pen, the sharp scratching sound finally ceasing in the dim room. Paul, the chained man, reaches out with his free hand, the iron cuff dragging across the stone floor, and rolls the scroll tight. He seals it with hot wax. He presses it into the hands of a man named Epaphroditus. Epaphroditus is a local from Philippi. He had nearly died bringing Paul financial support. Coughing and sweating through a brutal fever in the damp Roman air, his body burning up in a city that did not care if he lived or died. Now, recovered, he takes the parchment, tucks it into his heavy leather travel satchel, and steps out of the cell. He walks 800 miles. He travels the brutal, unforgiving length of the Via Egnatia. He sleeps on the cold earth, smelling the thick wood smoke of roadside fires. He walks past the polished marble statues of Caesar, past the smoking altars of the imperial cult, until he finally walks back through the heavy stone gates of his hometown, and he stands before his terrified church. When the believers gather in secret and unroll that scroll, more than that, it changes how you survive the hospital waiting rooms, the midnight panic, and the silent, desperate seasons of your own life. They are forced into a corner. They had wanted a strategy for hiding. They wanted a timeline for when the persecution would finally end. They wanted a guarantee that the Roman rods would not break their backs the way they had broken Paul's. Paul gives them none of it. Instead, he commands them to rejoice, to find chara, to discover autarkos. He is looking at a room full of men and women who are paralyzed by the looming threat of the local magistrates. And he is telling them that their physical circumstances are completely irrelevant to their internal peace. This letter is not a theological suggestion. It is a military order. He is commanding them to stop waiting. Caesar, to die. He is commanding them to stop waiting for the government to look the other way. If they tie their joy to their safety, Rome owns them. Rome holds the keys to their peace. Rome dictates their internal reality. But if they anchor their joy to a grace that Rome cannot execute, they become entirely untouchable. The choice was not about manufacturing a positive feeling. It was about declaring a sovereign allegiance. When you choose chara in the middle of a terrorizing circumstance, you are looking directly at the empire. Whether that empire is a first-century Roman colony, a terminal medical diagnosis. Because if biblical joy is just spiritualized happiness, then Paul is delusional. If joy is just putting on a brave face and ignoring the reality, or a sudden, devastating financial collapse, and you are telling it that it does not possess the final word. You are stripping it of its ultimate power. The Philippians are standing in the flicker of the oil lamp, listening to the words of a man who has already won. The chain did not break him. It simply gave him an elite audience. And as the final words of the parchment are read aloud, the echo of that rented cell begins to cross 2,000 years of history, reaching forward to ask one final, devastating question. A chained man dictated a letter to a frightened city and turned a rented cell into a microphone. A church faced the suffocating weight of the Roman Empire and discovered a grace that outranked Caesar. A brutal wooden cross tore the skin of a savior and birthed the exact definition of joy. Elite Praetorian guards stood watch over a prisoner and carried the gospel straight into Nero's palace. A dark dungeon held two beaten men at midnight, and the sound of their singing shattered the iron of the cold floor. Then God is demanding the psychological impossible from a man waiting for an executioner's blade. A Stoic philosopher preached the virtue of cold detachment, and a Jewish rabbi redefined it as an intimate attachment. A messenger walked 800 miles with a sealed scroll and delivered a secret that makes a human being absolutely untouchable. One letter, one chain, one unshakable joy. But maybe the part that stays with me most is the rotation of the guards. 6 times a day. The heavy iron cuff unlocks. The links drag across the stone. And a new elite soldier sits down, the very machine designed to silence Paul. The exact chain meant to break his mind became the state-sponsored vehicle that broadcast his message. Rome thought they were restricting him. They didn't realize they were just funding his ministry. The obstacle did not stop the grace. The obstacle was the exact place the grace went to work. If you are in a season where you are bargaining with the dark at 3 in the morning, staring at the ceiling and waiting for the circumstances of your life to finally resolve, if you are infected with the when-then disease, waiting for the diagnosis to clear, the bank account to fill, or the conflict to end before you give yourself permission to exhale, Philippians is an invitation to step. We are a species haunted by tomorrow, terrified of the variables we cannot control. And telling a terrified person to simply be happy is not just unhelpful. Out of the waiting room. Your peace is not a hostage to your tomorrow. It is a fortress built on grace today. And may the God who can turn an executioner's cell into a cathedral meet you on whatever cold floor you are sitting on right now, and give you a defiant joy that does not need the chain to break to begin singing. If this reached something deep inside you, subscribe. Leave a comment, even one word helps. Share this with someone who is waiting for their circumstances to change. Pray for us as we keep digging into these texts. It is cruel, but Paul is not offering a bumper sticker. He is diagnosing something. He is weaponizing a word that his readers thought they understood, and dictates a letter to a city he hasn't seen in a decade. The iron is heavy and cold against his skin, and he is turning it completely inside out. He is not writing a self-help book for the mildly discouraged. He is writing a survival manual for the deeply afflicted to feel the actual weight of what he is doing. You cannot just look at the man holding the pen. You have to look at the people holding the letter. You have to step out of the rented cell in Rome, travel 800 miles east, and walk into a city that was obsessed with exactly the kind of power Paul has just lost. Philippi is a city built on the memory of war. It sits squarely on the Via Egnatia, the massive stone highway connecting the eastern and western halves of the empire. But Philippi was not merely a cultural hub on a trade route. It was a Roman colony. A city populated heavily by retired military veterans who had been given land as a reward for their violent service. If you walked the streets in the 1st century, you did not just observe Rome. You felt its heavy, suffocating weight. You could hear the sharp clatter of iron hobnailed sandals on the basalt paving stones. You could smell the sweet, thick smoke of incense. The air in these rented quarters smells of unwashed bodies, stale wine, and the dust of the Roman streets, rising from the altars of the imperial cult in the public forum. Every coin in your purse, every marble statue in the square, and every official decree nailed to a post broadcasted a single, unbending political theology: Caesar is Lord, and Caesar brings salvation. To exist in Philippi as a follower of Jesus was to live in a state of constant, low-grade terror. These early believers had pledged their ultimate allegiance to a Jewish rabbi who had been crucified as an enemy of the state. They were a tiny, marginalized community surrounded by fiercely patriotic veterans who viewed any rival loyalty as treason. And now, the man who had planted their church, the Apostle Paul, was chained to a Roman soldier, waiting for a Roman executioner. From a purely human perspective, the movement was bleeding out. The believers in Philippi are terrified, and their terror makes perfect sense. Their fear is not a spiritual failure. It is a logical response to a lethal environment. They are waiting for Paul to send a letter of strategic retreat. They are likely hoping for a survival guide, a set of instructions on how to lay low, blend in, and avoid the attention of the local magistrates until the political heat dies down. They know that Paul is locked in a damp cell, facing the very real prospect of a beheading. Every time he shifts his weight, the chain rattles. Every time he breathes, he is reminded that his body is temporarily the property of the emperor, and they are bracing for a farewell address steeped in sorrow and final warnings. But the parchment that arrives in their city sounds nothing like a man preparing to die. It does not contain a strategy for hiding. It does not offer apologies for the suffering. Instead, when the believers gather in a dimly lit home to hear the letter read aloud, Paul uses a specific Greek word right in the opening lines, and the moment that word echoes off the walls, it shatters their entire framework of reality. The scroll unrolls. The wax seal breaks. The room goes silent. You can hear the breathing of frightened men and women. The flicker of an oil lamp casts long shadows on the plastered wall. They lean in. They wait for the grief. They wait for the panic. They expect the grim logistics of a dying movement. Instead, they get Philippians chapter 1, verse 4. Paul is telling them about his daily prayers for their community. He writes, "In all my prayers for all of you, I always pray with joy." The word our English Bibles translate as joy is the Greek chara. It is the beating heart of this entire letter. It appears as a noun and a verb 16 times. But to a first-century Greek speaker, chara carries a very specific weight. He is awaiting trial before the highest, most volatile court in the known world. His execution is not a theological metaphor. It is intimately, linguistically tied to another fundamental word: eris, grace, unmerited favor, a gift freely given. Chara is the direct response to charis. It is the physical, mental, and spiritual recognition of grace. Look at how this exact word operates in its most brutal context. The writer of Hebrews uses chara to describe the crucifixion. Hebrews chapter 12, verse 2. It says, "Jesus endured the cross for the joy set before him." The Greek word is chara. Look at the physical reality of the cross. A rough wooden beam tearing the skin of a human back. Iron spikes driven through wrists, bone scraping against metal. Asphyxiation, the smell of sweat and blood baking in the Judean heat. There is no happiness in that scene. There is no positive thinking. There is no silver lining. But there is chara, because chara does not care about the agony of the present moment. It anchors itself to the grace of the outcome. That root changes everything. When Paul writes chara from a Roman prison, he is not describing his mood. He is not putting on a brave face for a terrified church. Joy is not a spontaneous emotional reaction to good news. It is the calculated realization of grace, regardless of the news. Happiness requires a change in circumstances. Chara requires only a change in focus. It is a mathematical probability. And yet, the scroll he is filling with ink contains the word joy or rejoice 16 times. The chain rattles against the stone. The guard's switch shifts. The executioner waits for the order. The circumstances are terrible. The grace remains absolute. But Paul is not just surviving in that rented cell. He is turning the cell into a weapon. Because he realizes something deeply subversive about the men chained to his right arm. A detail about the Roman military machine that most people completely miss. Under Roman law, a high-profile prisoner awaiting imperial trial was subjected to the custodia militaris, strict military custody. This meant being physically shackled to a Roman soldier 24 hours a day. The iron links binding the prisoner's right wrist to the guard's left. It was a system carefully designed to strip a man of his privacy, his dignity, and, eventually, his mind. You slept when the soldier slept. You ate when the soldier allowed. You could not take a single step without feeling the heavy, metallic drag of the empire keeping you exactly where they wanted you. But Paul is not chained to a standard, low-ranking infantryman. He is chained to a member of the Praetorian Guard. The Praetorians were the absolute elite of the Roman military machine. They were the emperor's personal bodyguards, the political kingmakers of the capital. The men stationed directly inside the imperial palace who held unparalleled military and social influence. 16 times in 4 short chapters. He dictates it when discussing his imprisonment. He dictates it when considering his own bleeding out. They were the most heavily indoctrinated, fiercely loyal soldiers in the known world. And because of the grueling nature of guard duty, the watch rotated every 4 to 6 hours. The heavy iron cuff was unlocked. A new Praetorian stepped forward, and the chain was secured again, 6 times a day. A fresh elite soldier is forced to sit in a locked room and listen to everything Paul says. A new captive audience. If something about this strategy of subversion is stirring up questions you've never considered, you're exactly who this channel is for. Drop a thought in the comments and hit subscribe. Because every week we go deeper into the text than you knew was possible. So Paul does not sit in silence. He dictates his letters. He meets with visitors. He speaks of a king who outranks Caesar, of a kingdom not built with iron or tribute, of a grace that cannot be executed. And when their shift ends, those elite guards walk straight back into the heart of Nero's palace, carrying the infection of the gospel into the most secure, impenetrable fortress on earth. Rome thinks they have isolated a dangerous radical. They do not realize they have given him a direct, state-sponsored pipeline to the highest echelons of the empire. The chain is not a restriction, it is a microphone. Paul recognizes the profound irony of the situation. He dictates it when addressing the men who are actively trying to ruin his reputation outside the prison walls, which is why he writes to the Philippians in chapter 1, verse 12, that his imprisonment has actually served to advance the gospel, so that it has become known throughout the whole Praetorian Guard. But the believers back in Philippi would have understood this strategy better than anyone, because this is not the first time Paul has used a Roman prison to break something wide open. The believers in Philippi do not need this explained to them. They know exactly what Paul can do with a chain. Go back 10 years. Step into the inner dungeon of their own city. The air is pitch black, thick with the smell of raw sewage, sweat, and copper blood. Paul and Silas have just been stripped in the public square. They have been beaten with heavy Roman rods. Their backs are ribbons of torn flesh. Their feet are locked in heavy wooden stocks. The rough splinters grind against their ankles every time they flinch. The cold stone bites into their open wounds. It is midnight, the hour when the adrenaline fades and the body realizes exactly how much trauma it has sustained. The other prisoners are awake in the dark, listening to the 2 bruised men breathe. And then, a sound breaks the silence. They are singing. They do not whimper. They do not beg the guards for water. They do not curse the magistrates who beat them without a trial. Same word, again and again, striking the parchment like a hammer. Most people assume the book of Philippians is a Christian manifesto on positive thinking. They sing hymns of praise to the God of Israel. The song is not a coping mechanism. It is an assertion of jurisdiction. They are establishing who actually owns the room. The local magistrates thought they possessed the authority to break these men, but the singing proves the Roman rods missed their target. They bruised the flesh, but they could not touch the grace. Then the ground begins to heave. The tectonic plates beneath Philippi violently shift. The stone foundation shudders. The heavy iron doors tear away from their hinges. The chains snap off the wrists of every single prisoner in the dark. The believers listening to Paul's letter in that dimly lit house church remember this story. The very foundation of their community was built on the rubble of that jail. The man who locked Paul in those wooden stocks, the Philippian jailer himself, is likely sitting in the room right now, listening to this parchment being read aloud. They know the prison did not break Paul. Paul broke the prison. And as they listen to this new letter from Rome, they realize he is simply doing it again. The geography has shifted. The empire has escalated the stakes. But the strategy remains identical. A dark room, a heavy chain, an unexplainable, defiant joy. But Paul is not just writing to reminisce about the past. He is writing to diagnose the present.